Dracula, story of Bram Stoker's horror novel, a summary. The story begins with a young attorney named Jonathan Harker going out to see his client, Count Dracula, to complete the final paperwork for a real estate deal for the company he was working for. Lord Dracula's castle is somewhere in the Transilvania mountains of Western Europe, not so familiar in England. The story unfolds through the diary entries that Harker writes to his lady love, Meena Murray. I will here describe the first chapter of the story in detail. From the second chapter onwards, I am including only the gem of the story in my narration. Those interested can find the reading link of the English version of the novel from the description of this video. Chapter 1, Jonathan's Diary. The train left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on May 1st and was scheduled to reach Vienna at 6:45 a.m. the following day. But it was an hour late. Next stop was Budapest. Budapest looked like a beautiful city from the train. I wanted to walk around and see the city. However, as my train was an hour late and the next train was likely to leave on time, I only managed a short jog around the railway station. As I stopped in the city and continued my journey after that, I had the thought that I was leaving the Western world and entering the colorful antiquity of the Eastern world. If we crossed the bridges built across the wide and deep Danube River that flows through the center of the city, we enter the Oriental culture, the remnants of the old Turkish Empire. We left Budapest on time and reached Cloudenburg by dusk. I spent the night at the Hotel Royal there. Dinner was paprika handel, a sort of chicken curry with red chilies. It was a bit spicy but tasty. The recipe should be collected from someone to be given to Meena. I asked the waiter about it. He said that paprika handel or chili chicken is a national dish and is available everywhere in the Carpathian region. The little German I learned in the past was very useful here. What would I do without it, really? Before leaving England, I went to the British Museum in the little time I had while in London and tried to gather information about the Transylvanian region by referring to books and maps. I thought that in dealing with a prominent person in a country I did not know, my knowledge of his country would be of advantage to me. The district where my client lived was a wild and hitherto little known place in Europe, bordering the three countries of Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina within the Carpathian Mountains. From my investigations, I have not been able to find any maps or descriptions that would help me locate Lord Dracula's palace in comparison to other countries in Europe. These notes are to tell Meena when I get back home and keep things in mind. If we talk about the inhabitants of the Transylvanian area, they mainly fall into four groups. The Saxons are a mixture of all races in the south, the Magyars in the east, and the Seculars in the north and west. They claim to be descendants of Attila and the Huns. The Carpathian region can be said to be the cradle of superstitions and supernatural stories of the whole world. I decided to ask about that when I saw Dracula. My bed and room at the Royal Hotel were very comfortable, but various dreams disturbed my sleep throughout the night. Also, I wonder if it was the dog barking outside my window all night or the paprika handle I ate for dinner that kept me awake. Even though I drank a whole big bottle of water that night, still the thirst remained. I fell asleep almost at dawn. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of someone constantly knocking on the door of the room. I think I slept really well then. For breakfast, again, paprika hendel and chili, a kind of porridge called mamaliga with corn powder, and stuffed eggplant with the ground meat, which they call implatata, good and savory food. I had to eat breakfast in a hurry because my train would leave before 8 o'clock. I reached the railway station at 7:30 and boarded the train, but it started only after a long time. It seems to me that the farther east we go, people pay less attention to punctuality. If this is the case here, what will happen if we go a little farther east in China in terms of timing? At the end of the train journey, Jonathan arrives in Bistris, a major city in northern Romania. He stays that night at a special hotel mentioned in Dracula's letters. The hotel manager gives Jonathan a letter from Dracula. The letter advised him that he should set off the next morning and reach the Borgo Pass, where a horse drawn carriage would be awaiting for him. The hotelier's wife discourages Jonathan, who is about to leave the next day, and tries to warn him of some danger. Jonathan did not fully understand her language, as neither he nor she knew each other's language. She tried to tell him that it was the day before the feast of St. George, and that the evil spirits were stronger on that day. The latter puts a cross on a necklace around his neck. Jonathan, who belonged to the Anglican sect, did not believe in any of the decorations of the Catholic faith, but he respectfully bought the crucifix from the innkeeper's wife and kept it. When he left for the journey, a number of villagers raised their hands and drew a cross on him, and his fellow travelers gave him many small holy objects for protection, which worried him a little, but they said that they did it to protect him from the evil eye. At the end of his long and strange journey, Jonathan Harker waits in front of the Dracula's crumbling but gigantic castle. Jonathan wondered what wonders and adventures awaited him. It has been a long time since I started waiting here like this. At last, Count Dracula arrived to receive Jonathan. High, black coated, clean shaven, except for his white beard, Lord Dracula greeted Mr. Harker with a shake of the Jonathan could almost sense his strength from grasping of Lord Dracula's hand to handshake, but his palm was frozen almost like the hand of a dead body. However, Count Dracula's warm welcome and hospitality were enough to dispel Jonathan's doubts. Entering the castle, Jonathan eats his dinner and talks with Count Dracula. Dracula's physical features are almost revealed to Jonathan Harker in the light of the burning chimney. The Count had a pale body and sharp teeth and peculiarly pointed ears. Jonathan could sense the quickening of his heart as the fear and doubt that had been put aside for a while returned to his mind. Jonathan Harker wakes up the next morning to find a note from Lord Dracula informing him that he will not be at the castle for some urgent reason. The note also includes an apology to Jonathan for his absence. Jonathan could not meet a single worker inside the fort. Anyway, after the delicious meal, Jonathan thought he would use this opportunity to take a walk around the fort. He walked around his bedroom and the adjacent rooms. The adjoining bedroom was decorated with expensive furniture and carpets. The library had a large collection of books, but one important fact that attracted Jonathan's attention was that there was not even a single mirror to be seen anywhere in the fort. Returning to his castle, Count Dracula has a long conversation with Jonathan after evening. Much of the conversation was about the British pronunciation of English. It seems that Dracula was keen to acquire the necessary knowledge of local dialects before moving to his new home in England. The two men talked at length about the ghosts that roam the Transylvania hills. Next, Jonathan was ready to give an explanation about the house that Count Dracula bought in England. Known as Carfax, the estate and bungalow was a lonely house with no neighbors. There was only a lunatic asylum and a very old, dilapidated church nearby. Dracula had no intention of stopping his speech even though it was late at night. But by the time it was dawn, Dracula quickly ended his conversation and turned away. Dracula's unusual behavior only increased Jonathan's worries and discomfort. The next day, Dracula suddenly comes near to Jonathan Harker, who is shaving. To his shock, Jonathan realizes that the shadow of Dracula standing behind him is not reflected in the mirror in front of him. Shocked by Dracula's unexpected arrival, the knife he was shaving with fell down from his hand, cutting Jonathan's face to bleeding. Jonathan is shocked to see the change in Dracula at the sight of Jonathan Harker's blood. Dracula bends towards Jonathan's neck in his hunger to drink his blood, but only turns back when his body hits the beads of the crucifix around Jonathan's neck. Dracula throws the mirror in front of Jonathan away through the window, warning that it is dangerous to be injured in the Transylvanian region. While eating breakfast that morning, Jonathan notices that he has never once seen Dracula eat or drink water. Doubts in his mind have once again prevailed in front of Jonathan Harker, who is going to investigate and find out the mysteries of the castle. There are many doors that cannot be opened and locked with keys. Jonathan soon realizes that he is bound like a prisoner inside the castle. That night, Jonathan discusses the history of the Transylvanian region with Dracula. Taking great interest in answering Jonathan's questions, Dracula was quite eloquent as he talked about the many wars that had taken place in the region, the Dracula family's fortunes in the wars, and the great victories his family had won in them. In the days that followed, Dracula bombarded Jonathan with questions about the English language, the British way of life, and the English laws. To Jonathan, who had arrived in Transylvania for a short stay, Dracula asked to extend his stay here for another month. It was really a kind of command. Count Dracula suggests writing to the company he works for and his girlfriend Meena about extending his stay for another month. Out of obligation to his company to do his job properly, and out of loyalty to Dracula, Jonathan Harker obeyed the suggestion of Dracula. Count Dracula, about to leave for the evening, instructs Jonathan not to sleep anywhere but in his bedchamber, which has been prepared for him. Jonathan Harker nails his crucifix to the wall above his bed. Having planned to check the other parts of the castle, as soon as Dracula leaves, Jonathan sneaks out a window to see if Dracula has left the castle. As he sees Dracula crawling like a lizard down the ramparts of the castle, Jonathan wonders what kind of creature he is and fears whether a release and a return trip from here ever be possible. After forcing open a room that was once locked, Jonathan sat down on a chair there after checking the room. Had he forgotten all of Dracula's warnings to sleep nowhere but in his own bedroom? Was it a dream or did it actually happen? Three beautiful women with red lips and sharp teeth come to visit him. In Jonathan's own words, I found it to be a twisted and intense feeling when one of the plump young women puts her lips to Jonathan Harker's neck. Dracula rushes in and chases the women away. I will release him to you when I am done. Then you can kiss him all you want. Dracula snapped. To appease the women, Dracula takes the body of a half dead infant from his sack. The last image in Jonathan's mind as he slipped from half sleep into unconsciousness was of the women getting hurt. The next morning, Jonathan wakes up in his bed in his room. Jonathan isn't sure if the events of the night before was real or just a dream. It was the 19th of May. Dracula asked Jonathan Harker to write three letters each to his girlfriend Meena and the company he works for, dated June 12, 19 and 29 respectively. Dracula suggests writing in the letters that he has left the castle and is continuing his journey very safely. Meanwhile, a group of nomads reached the fort. Jonathan thought that he could somehow escape from here by informing his friends in England of his plight. Jonathan writes a letter in Mina's name and passes it to the gypsies through the windows. But when Dracula comes to Jonathan that evening with the same letter, he burns it in the fire, declaring that his letter is an act of evil that is not worthy of Dracula's hospitality and friendship. The month of May has flown by, and now it is almost halfway through June. Jonathan is still a prisoner at the fort. Next day, some more nomads reach the fort. They are unloading large wooden boxes from a horse drawn cart. One day, Harker's clothes go missing. What does Harker see looking out of the window? Dracula wearing his coat and suit, crawling down the wall of the castle like a lizard. Dracula has a treasure trove that was once given to beautiful and monstrous women. Jonathan realizes that Dracula is committing heinous crimes in this disguise. Later that day, a woman screams like a mad woman and comes to the door of the fort demanding her baby. A pack of wolves from somewhere within the wall of the fort attacked the woman and killed her. Jonathan decides to walk through the castle's parapet and enter Dracula's room through the window to see what is inside. When Jonathan Harker arrives at Dracula's room the next day, he finds nothing but a pile of gold in the room. Jonathan finds a passageway leading down from the room and descends into an almost cave like room. There he sees 50 big boxes filled with earth. Opening the boxes one by one, Jonathan finds Dracula sleeping in one of them, dead or sleeping. Terrified, he runs back to his own room. Today is the 20th of June. Dracula tells Jonathan Harker that he will leave the next day. Dracula leaves the castle door wide open as if yielding to Jonathan's insistence that he leave for himself. But as he tries to get out of the castle, a large pack of wolves is waiting outside to receive Jonathan. Unable to leave, Jonathan goes back to his room. Jonathan hears Dracula talking loudly to someone. Today is my turn, tomorrow yours. Without making a sound, Jonathan opens the door of his room and sees Dracula and the three women of the previous day. Next morning, Jonathan Harker inspects Dracula's room again. Descending the stairs to the cellar, he sees a sleeping Dracula in the same box. It seems almost as if Dracula has regained his youth. A drop of blood is dripping down from the side of his lips. Jonathan tries to kill Dracula by picking up a nearby earthenware, but there was no result. His blows with the axe did not injure Dracula in any way. They hit Dracula in the face, but they slips away without making even a scratch, and despite of all his efforts. Jonathan returns to Dracula's room upstairs and wonders if he can escape by stealing some gold for his trip. In England, Jonathan's girlfriend Meena Murray receives a letter saying that Jonathan has left Transylvania. Meena Murray, an assistant headmistress of a school, has the plan to leave the job and to help Jonathan with his work as an assistant after marrying him. To begin with, she is learning typewriting and shorthand. Her best friend is Lucy Westerner. Lucy is also engaged in marriage negotiations and preparations for marriage. One of her marriage proposals was from John Seward, the director of an insane asylum in London, and the other was from Quincy Morris, a wealthy American citizen. But she likes the proposal of a young man named Arthur Homewood. For Dr. John Seward, Lucy's rejection of the proposal was somewhat disappointing, but due to the treatment of a particular patient, Mr. Renfield, who visited his hospital, kept him very busy. But Quincy Morris admires Arthur Homewood. Chapter 6. Meena visits Whitby, a seaside town in the northeast of England, with Lucy. The ruined old church and cemetery in the very scenic town are notorious for being haunted. Mr. Swales, the old countryman they converse with, tells many popular stories about the town, but dismisses the ghost stories as nonsense. However, many of the graves in that cemetery are of sailors who died at sea and others of soldiers who died abroad. So many of them are empty, he informs. As Lucy talks about her wedding preparations, Mina is saddened by the fact that she has not heard from her boyfriend Jonathan for the past month. Dr. John Seward's new patient, Renfield, is becoming a real headache. Renfield suffers from a form of mania, eating living creatures alive. First, he catches flies with a sugar trap, then, he catches with flies as snares octopuses, and with octopuses small birds. It is a pleasure for him to see each living being feeding on another. When Renfield finally feeds on it, he feels like he is getting the power of all those creatures. He should be a gentleman who lives with the aim of feeding living creatures as much as he can. One after another, problems are cropping up for Meena to worry about. First of all, it has been months since she heard anything about her boyfriend, Jonathan Harker. Recently, Lucy has started to wake up in her sleep, dream walking, for no apparent reason. Also, she is a bit anemic, even though she is healthy. Meena, her companion, does not understand why. One day, Meena, who is going for an evening ride, meets the old man Swales on the way. They notice a ship drifting in the sea as if it were out of control, viewing from the shore. Swales said it appears to be a Russian built ship and hopes more information about the ship will be revealed in the press in the coming days. Chapter 7. The ship Demeter, seen by Meena and Swales, runs aground the next day in the gale near the shore of Whitby. No crew members were found inside the ship. The captain, who was found dead with a cross attached to his chest, was tied to the ship's steering wheel with a rope. A wolf of unusual size jumped out of the ship as soon as the ship was ashore and ran and hid somewhere in the forest on the outskirts of the city. There were about 50 wooden boxes to say as cargo on the ship. These wooden boxes were under the charge of the Solicitor General at Whitby. From the ship's captain's logbook, the following information was gathered. The ship was returning to England from the Russian port of Varna. The journey was pleasant for the first 10 days. After that, one of the employees goes missing under mysterious circumstances. Another crewman see a thin, lanky man on the ship's dock. He was certain that he would not be part of the ship's crew. All the crew members searched the entire ship but could not find such a person. However, crew members continued to disappear one by one every day or two. Fear crept in among the crew. By the time it finally reached the coast of England, there were only four crew members left. Fog soon enveloped their ship, making their journey to port impossible. By the time the fog lifted, two more of the crew were missing. The first officer, who went to the bottom of the ship, shouting that whatever the ghost is, it is important to see it, came back running and jumped into the sea. At last, the captain, alone on board, tied himself to the ship's wheel with his crucifix to be with the ship till his last breath. Mina is worried about Lucy and Jonathan. Lucy's dream walking becomes frequent than ever. On the day of the ship's captain's funeral, Lucy was even more upset. Their old acquaintance in Whitby, Swales was found dead with his throat slit. The dead Mr. Swales had a look on his face as if he had seen something terrifying. Months have passed. It was August 10. When Mina woke up in the middle of the night, there was no one in Lucy's bed. Mina goes out looking for her and finds her sitting on a bench in the courtyard of the collapsed church. A tall black shadow looms over her, like giving a kiss. The shadowy figure looks back at Mina as she walks up to Lucy. It had a pale white face and bright red eyes. By the time Mina approached Lucy, the shadowy figure had disappeared as if it had never been there. Lucy was gasping for breath, looking like she was half asleep. Mina takes her shawl and blankets her and takes Lucy back home. Sometime after arriving home, Lucy wakes up and regains consciousness, but Mina discovers two needle like wounds on Lucy's neck. Mina thinks she may have unknowingly injured Lucy while pinning her shawl. In the following days, Lucy continues to dream work, but Mina, who has locked the bedroom door, prevents Lucy from leaving the room. One evening, Mina and Lucy go for a walk together. They see a black figure inside the cemetery of the old church in the dim light after sunset. Its eyes were burning like embers. That night, Mina wakes up and sees Lucy in bed, pointing her hand towards the window. Looking out through the window that Lucy had pointed to, Mina saw a large bat flapping its wings and flying away from the window. Mina suddenly turns to look at Lucy and sees Lucy covered with a blanket and fast asleep. Lucy's health was deteriorating day by day. She was getting pale and white. The wound on her neck was getting better day by day. For Mina, the worries about her friend were too much for her to bear. First is Lucy's deteriorating health. Lucy's mother, who was already ill, could not bear the news of her daughter's ill health. It has been months since she heard anything about her dear friend and lover, Jonathan Harker. The following days were eventful. One of them was a letter from the Whitby Solicitor General demanding that the soil filled boxes from the beached ship Demeter be moved to Dracula's newly purchased Carfax estate, Bangalore. Lucy's health is improving. Hearing the news that Jonathan Harker has been hospitalized in Budapest with brain fever, Mina makes preparations to visit Jonathan in Budapest. The patient at John Seward's Hospital, Renfield, becomes increasingly angry and out of control. He is now in no mood to obey anyone. One day, Renfield, who has escaped from the hospital, goes to the chapel of the Carfax estate. He calls out to his master and cries and declares himself obedient. Dr. Seward and his staff arrive and take Renfield to the hospital and put him in a cell. Renfield grumbles in his cell, "Excuse me, my lord, my master, I'll be right back." Mina has reached out to Jonathan in Budapest. Jonathan has changed completely. All that remains now is a shadow of the healthy old Jonathan Harker. He can't remember anything about his time in Transylvania. The nun who was attending to Jonathan tells Mina that when he was unconscious with fever, he would shout many incredible and terrifying things. He still has Jonathan's diary in which he kept notes about the events and experiences throughout the journey. Jonathan hands over the diary to Mina, implying that he must have written in the diary about the circumstances of his fever. with the instruction not to reveal what is written in the diary to anyone except in the case of necessity. Meena seals the diary with wax without even opening it, deciding to open it only at a point of dire need. Meena and Jonathan decide to get married as soon as possible. Lucy sends a congratulatory message to them, knowing the marriage decision. Lucy's health, which seemed to be improving for a while, began to deteriorate again. At night, she hears the sound of some creature barking at her window. Lucy grew paler by the day. Arthur Homewood, Lucy's fiancé, notes this and texts Dr. Seward, asking him to examine Lucy. With the limitations of Dr. Seward's knowledge, he could not diagnose what the illness was. So he seeks the help of his teacher, Professor Helsing from Amsterdam. Professor Helsing, who examines Lucy, cannot find the cause of Lucy's illness, but Helsing indicates to Seward that he suspects excessive blood loss. Rushing back to Amsterdam, Professor Helsing suggests to keep him informed of Lucy's health by telegraph. Seward's patient Renfield is now generally calm, but when given the chance, he sneaks out and arrives at the door of the Carfax Estate Chapel. He is about to attack Seward and the hospital attendants who come to bring him back, but he calms down again when he sees a huge bat flying against the backdrop of the moon rising far on the horizon. Renfield, once again confined to the mental asylum cell, continues his fly hunt. Lucy's health is improving, but suddenly on September 6th, her condition deteriorated again. Realizing that he cannot save her, Dr. Seward sends a telegram to Professor Helsing asking him to come to England immediately. Richard Homewood and Dr. Seward accompany Lucy. By the time Professor Helsing arrives, Lucy is pale and barely able to breathe on her own. Helsing transfuses Richard Homewood's blood into Lucy. Listeners will remember that at the time of the story, the science of medicine, communication facilities, and transportation facilities were not as developed as they are today. Examining the wounds of Lucy's neck, the two doctors come to the conclusion that she lost blood through these wounds, but they had no idea how the wounds were caused. Professor Helsing asked Dr. Seward to watch over Lucy that night. Lucy wakes up a little later feeling much better, but Dr. Seward could not stay awake the next night. He falls asleep at night. The next morning, Seward and Helsing find a completely pale and debilitated Lucy. Her lips are crimson and dark blue. Seward transfuses her with some more blood. Seward notices that Lucy's neck is torn from the wounds. Van Helsing makes a garland of garlic flowers and puts it around Lucy's neck and arranges garlic flowers around the room. Van Helsing was sure that Lucy would sleep well today. Lucy's mother welcomes Helsing and Seward to Lucy's residence the next morning. She says that last night she removed all those foul smelling flowers from the room and opened all the windows to get fresh air. After hearing Lucy's mother, Mrs. Westerner's explanation, Helsing and Seward rushed to Lucy's bedside, just as they had feared. Lucy is losing all her blood this time and is nearing death. They bring Lucy back to life with another blood transfusion. Helsing and Seward instruct Lucy's mother that she not to move a single thing out of Lucy's room without their permission. The next 3 or 4 days were peaceful for Lucy. Her health was gradually improving. A news item in the newspaper of September 17 was alarming. A large wolf escaped from the city zoo by jumping over a fence and returned the next morning with a full body of bottlenose sticks stuck to its fur. Later that day, Dr. Seward's patient Renfield attacks the doctor and cuts him on the wrist. Then he leaks the blood, chanting, "Blood is life." It is not until the next morning that Dr. Seward receives the telegram from Helsing that he go to Lucy's room that night and keep watch of her. That night, Lucy hears the sound of flapping wings outside her window and the sound of a wolf howling from outside the room. Lucy's mother, frightened by the sound, also come to Lucy's room and lies on the bed with her. Not long after, the wolf enters the room by breaking the windows. Terrified, Lucy's mother snatched the garlic garland from Lucy's neck and tried to throw it at the wolf. However, Mrs. Westerner dies of a massive heart attack caused by fear. The four maids of the house, who rushed to the room on hearing the noise, could not bear the death of their mistress. They go to the dining room and drink the wine that was there. Either intoxicated with the wine or something else, all four of them fall unconscious on the spot. Lucy wrote a letter about the events that had transpired and stashed it in her undergarments to avoid her death. At least they will see this writing when I am about to be buried, she told herself. The next morning, Seward and Helsing arrive at Westerna's home to find the devastation. The four maids are unconscious in the dining room. Lucy's mother is dead. Lucy is on the brink of death once again. This time, all the wounds on her neck have been mutilated. She also needs another blood transfusion, but all of them have given blood once. One more time, one more time, it will also endanger their lives. This time, Quincy Morris announces that he is ready to donate blood, but he is suspicious of where all the blood he gave Lucy in the past few days has gone. Richard Homewood also arrives at Westerner home. The death of his father, the death of Lucy's mother, Mrs. Westerner, and Lucy's illness all upset him, but his presence makes a positive difference in Lucy's health. Meanwhile, Renfield once again escapes from the asylum and fatally injures two workers who arrive from Carfax with a box full of soil. Helsing places garlic flowers around Lucy's bed, but Lucy unknowingly pushes them away in her sleep. That night, Dr. Seward comes to Lucy's room to check on her and sees a bat flying at her window. By the dawn of September 20th, the wounds of Lucy's neck had disappeared. Realizing that Lucy is about to die, the doctors wake up Homewood, who is sleeping in the next room, and tell him to say Lucy goodbye. Seeing Richard, Lucy asks him to kiss her in a soft voice. Helsing stops Richard from doing so, insisting that he only kiss her on the forehead. Lucy dies. A dying Lucy returns to her pre illness beauty. Is Lucy becoming a ghost too? Before Lucy's funeral, Professor Van Helsing covers her coffin and body with garlic and inserts a cross between her lips. After her funeral, Professor Helsing tells Dr. Seward to open her grave and cut off Lucy's head and remove her head. The next morning, Professor Helsing opens the grave and finds that someone has removed the crucifix from between her lips. Realizing that things have gotten out of hand, Professor Helsing says their next move needs to be very deliberate. Heartbroken over the death of his girlfriend Lucy, Richard Holmwood cannot believe that she is dead when he sees the beauty of her dying face. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Meena, who had been married in Budapest, had returned to England. One day they saw in the city a man with a black beard of extraordinary height and of a terrifying appearance. Jonathan had no doubt that it was Dracula. Losing his sense of space and time for a moment, Jonathan falls into a slightly shallow place and loses consciousness. Jonathan wakes up from unconsciousness and can't remember anything from the past. In any case, Meena decides that it is imperative that she read and understand Jonathan's diaries, which he wrote while he was in Transylvania and which Meena kept under seal. The local newspaper reports that several children are kidnapped by a strange woman from the area of Hampstead Heath, where Lucy's funeral was held. And when they return, they find distinctive cuts on their necks. Van Helsing visits Meena to talk to Meena about Lucy's death. Meena, horrified by Jonathan's diary entries, gives the diary to Helsing to read. Jonathan remembers his experiences in Transylvania as he realizes that Helsing takes on too much importance in his diaries and talks about it. He had no doubt that Dracula had moved to England. Maud Renfield has resumed his fly catching spree. When Van Helsing visits the ward, he shows him a newspaper article about a woman who kidnaps children. Noting that the missing children return with neck wounds similar to Lucy's, Helsing concludes that the woman they refer to as the Blue Fur Lady is Lucy's ghost. Seward would not have been so quick to agree with Professor Van Helsing's conclusion that Lucy had become a ghost. Seward also participates in his investigations out of respect for his mentor Helsing. Examining an abducted child, they find that the wounds on the child's neck are similar to those on Lucy's neck. That night, they open Lucy's grave and find it empty. Disagreeing with Seward's suggestion that her body may have been stolen by some cemetery robbers, Helsing asks him to hide in a corner of the cemetery and watch what happens. At dawn, they see something that looks like a flash of white lightning moving through the trees. They rush there and see a toddler lying there. However, Seward is unwilling to believe that Lucy is responsible for all of this until he opens the tomb once again and finds Lucy back in her coffin. She was more beautiful than ever as she lay peacefully asleep inside the box. Lucy is now the dead among the undead, and the only way to stop her from her evil deeds is to behead her, stuff her mouth with garlic, and drive a sharp rib through her heart. Lucy's boyfriend Arthur Homewood and Quincy Morris join them. Although Homewood is against mutilating the corpse of his beloved girlfriend, he also accompanies Helsing to the cemetery. That night, when the four reach the cemetery, they find an empty grave. To prevent Lucy's ghost from re entering the tomb, Helsing sprinkles the tomb with holy water and seals the tomb with sacrificial bread. And together they hide in a corner of the cemetery. After a while, a woman covered in white clothes walks towards Lucy's grave in the cemetery with a baby. Or was it a monstrous creature in Lucy's form? A red light like hellfire was streaming from its eyes. Drops of hot blood dripped from its lips. All four of them are surrounding her. As she sees Arthur Homush, she throws the child in her arms to the ground and passionately tells him to come to her. Arthur Homush took a few steps towards her, but by then Helsing had reached to their midst, brandishing a cross. Suddenly, he removed the sacrificial loaves that had sealed the tomb, and Lucy's ghost disappeared into the tomb through the gap in the tomb cover. Having seen this for himself, Arthur Homewood is ready to perform the rituals as suggested by Professor Helsing. That evening, Homewood arrives at the cemetery with his friends and uses a hammer to drive a large spear into Lucy's heart. They see a kind of serenity teasing her face from the ferocity of hell. Professor Van Helsing reassures Homewood that through his actions, Homewood has saved Lucy's soul from the clutches of darkness. Professor Helsing suggests that Jonathan and Meena come and stay with Seward. Meena also learns about the causes of Lucy's death, transcribing Dr. Seward's diaries. Reading Jonathan's diaries, Seward realizes that Dracula, who has moved to England, has become his next door neighbor. Does Renfield's madness have anything to do with Dracula? They found out that the 50 boxes filled with earth, which Jonathan discovered while at Transylvania from Dracula's bedroom cellar, have been brought to the estate chapel at Carfax, and notices that some of them are missing. Meanwhile, Morris and Homewood also come to stay at Seward's hospital. The professor has said that he will come to discuss the future plans after 2 days. Meena visits Renfield with Dr. Seward's permission. He treats Meena with great respect and awareness, devouring the flies he has caught with maddened enthusiasm. Returning with his ideas and decisions, Helsing praises Meena for her work in typing and neatly stacking Seward's diaries, but suggests that Meena will have no part in the work ahead, the war against Dracula. There is no part for a woman. The professor gathers the men together and discusses the problem before them. Ghosts and spirits known as Nosferatu are immortal and possess extraordinary powers. They have the ability to control various animals and even natural forces. They can take on any shape they want and disappear from sight at a moment's notice. As strong as they are, they also have some weak points. They cannot live without drinking blood. They cannot enter a house unless someone calls them. Their power is lost during bright daylight hours. At that time, they have to seek shelter in coffins or graves. They completely lost their power in front of the cross and in the proximity of holy objects such as the sacrificial bread. The first step to destroying Dracula is to find out where all the boxes full of earth brought from Transylvania to England are. They decide not to scare Mina, a woman, by telling her the details of their plans. They all visit Renfield together. Looking completely calm, he tells her that he needs to be released from the hospital or face dire consequences. But Sivard is unwilling to release him, thinking that his conscious state may be part of his madness. All the men in the group make a trip to the chapel at Carfax the next day. They could find only 29 of the 50 boxes inside the chapel. Suddenly, many rats came inside the church as a threat to them. They suddenly whistle and call their pet dogs, who chase the rats away. Back at the hospital, Professor Helsing talks to Renfield and tries to uncover some of the secrets. But Renfield refuses to talk to him. Mina's peace is eroding day by day. For many days, she could not sleep well. Once she hears a noise from Renfield's room and finds her window open. Looking outside, she sees a thin layer of fog moving through the hospital compound towards the insane asylum. She felt that the mist had life and thought. She fell into laughs. When she wakes up in shock, there is a cloud inside her room, as if leaning towards her to kiss her. Maybe it was all part of her dream. Jonathan Harker investigates and discovers that 12 of the earthen boxes missing from the chapel at Carfax are in two houses in London and the rest in a house in the London suburb of Piccadilly. Renfield's character has seen some changes lately. His fly catching has been a little off lately, yet he kept murmuring, I want lives. Renfield is troubled by the unpleasant question of how he will account for the souls he kills, even if they are flies and small creatures. That night, hearing a scream from Renfield's room, the four rush to see Renfield lying in a pool of blood, struggling for death. Before dying, Renfield admits that he was friends with Dracula and that Dracula would have given him many flies and small creatures in exchange for his obedience. When Mina came to visit Renfield the other day, Renfield realized that Mina's body was pale and that Dracula had begun to drain her of life blood. Jealous and hating Dracula, Renfield grabs Dracula as he enters his room that night, and an enraged Dracula throws him against the wall. The quartet, in search of Jonathan Harker, Helsing, Seward, Homewood, and Morris, go to Harker and Mina's room. The room is locked from inside. They slammed the door open. What they saw there was terrifying. Jonathan is lying unconscious on the ground. Mina is kneeling on the bed, drinking blood from within the open heart of Dracula, who is crouching close to her. Dracula turns to face the foursome who have stormed into the room. Are the flames of hell flowing from his eyes? Professor Helsing is quick to respond. He confronts Dracula with a sacrificial loaf in his hand. Dracula retreats like a wisp of fog, streaming out the door. Entering the couple's study, they find Dracula tearing up all their papers and documents. Luckily, they kept duplicate copies of it all. Mina and Jonathan come back to their senses. She narrates the incident. Jonathan was unconscious when she woke up that night. Dracula emerged from a layer of fog that had entered the room. Blood spurts from her neck as Dracula threatens to kill Jonathan if he makes a sound at her. Claiming that this is not the first time he has drunk her blood, he splits his breast and forcefully drinks the blood of her captor. Dracula, speaking scornfully of the four who have turned against him, promises to make Mina his flesh of flesh and his own. Realizing her plight, Mina breaks her heart and prays, God, have mercy on me. Waiting any longer will only lead to more accidents and damage. The final battle has begun. Jonathan Harker and the four others go to the chapel on the Carfax estate and seal all the earthen boxes with the sacrificial bread loaves. What they did was to prevent Dracula's chance of entering them by rendering his quarters useless. Next, they seal Mina's room with the sacrificial bread and place one of the sacrificial bread on Mina's forehead. That holy mass bread causes a burn on her forehead. Organizing the keys to Dracula's London houses, they join Morris and Homewood to purge and seal 12 boxes stored in two London houses, while Harker and Helsing set out to find the house in Piccadilly. When they reached Piccadilly, they could see only 8 boxes. Where is the remaining box? Meanwhile, Mina sees Dracula taking off from Carfax and informs the quartet about it by texting them. Helsing and his team hope that Dracula will reach Piccadilly with the goal of saving at least the other boxes, while Dracula's boxes at Carfax are useless. Dracula arrives at his house in Piccadilly before the waiting group. Dracula doesn't have much power because it is daytime. However, Dracula escapes through a window without being caught by the quartet. Professor Helsing concludes that despite Dracula's attempts to frighten them in various ways, his powers have greatly diminished. Only one of the caskets used as Dracula's resting place remains. Professor Helsing hypnotizes Mina in an attempt to learn about Dracula's movements. Helsing's calculations are correct that by drinking Dracula's blood, Mina's soul, which is part of its life, can take on the thoughts of Dracula's soul. They hear the sounds of a sea voyage. Their fear was certain that Dracula was leaving England and fleeing to some other land. What if Dracula tricks them into hiding and Mina turns into a fairy like Lucy did? From the investigation, they realized something. Dracula is also a passenger on a ship called the Tsarina Catherine, which is sailing from England to the Russian port of Varna. Dracula arrived in England 3 months ago from Varna port, declaring it their duty to eliminate Dracula for the greater good of mankind. Professor Helsing vows to destroy Dracula by any means necessary. Thinking about the possibility of a blood relationship with Mina and Dracula, Helsing advises not to even to hint Meena about their future plans. Sometimes Dracula could sense her mental dealings. They decide to face Dracula there when he lands at Varna harbor. Meena also decides to go with them. She may be able to help track Dracula's movements through her telepathic connection with him. Helsing agrees. Meena asks the gang to destroy her instantly if she becomes a blood drinking ghost or fairy for any reason. On October 12th, the team members leave for Varna port by Orient Express train. Van Helsing makes move to board the ship, the Sarina Catharine, as soon as it docks at Varna. Mina was getting tired day by day. Meanwhile, the team gets information that the Sarina Catharine has not come to Varna port, but has docked Galet's port, which is far away. Dracula rerouted his journey because he had anticipated their movements through his psychic connection with Mina. However, Helsing advises them not to despair because Dracula, who is overconfident by defeating them and escaping from them, will be easy to defeat. Helsing's group travels from Varna by train to the port of Galatz. Mina's dreams do not reveal much about Dracula. However, by listening to the sound of the waves, Helsing deduces that the Dracula is now somewhere on the beach. Their attempt to reach the harbor before Dracula's earthen casket was removed from the ship was unsuccessful. They received information from the Tsarina Catherine's captain that a businessman named Emanuel Hildesheim has taken possession of the box and delivered it to a merchant named Petros Skins. During the investigation, Skinsky's body was found in a nearby cemetery with his throat cut. After discussing possible ways to get Dracula back to his castle, the group splits into three and continues their hunt, while Mina and Helsing travel by train homeward and Harker continue their journey in a rented boat and Seward and Morris on horseback. Helsing's plan is to get to Dracula's castle, bless it, consecrate it, and seal it with sacred objects before Dracula reaches the fort. As Jonathan and Homewood travel further down the river, they hear the sound of a large twin engine ship ahead of them. They speed their way, hoping that it will be Dracula's ship. Helsing and Mina get off the train in a town called Agesti. From there to Dracula Fort, only horse-drawn carriages can be relied upon. They continue along the same scenic routes that Jonathan Harker traveled months ago. Helsing and Mina have reached the Borgo Pass. They continue their journey towards the fort. Helsing cannot hypnotize Mina to sleep or learn information from her. On the way, Helsing and Mina meet the three voluptuous women who visited Jonathan when he stayed at the fort months ago. They politely invite Helsing to come with them. Their horses, frightened by seeing the fairies, die there. A tired Mina has no energy for the journey ahead. After laying Mina on the side of the road and protecting her by sprinkling sacrificial bread around her, Helsing proceeds alone towards Dracula's castle on foot. Arriving at the castle the next afternoon, Van Helsing finds the graves of the three female ghosts and is stunned by their beauty lying in the coffins. However, not allowing himself to forget his purpose, Helsing begins a ritual to neutralize and purify them. Upon further investigation, Helsing discovers a rather royal tomb inscribed with Dracula's name, consecrating the grave with sacrificial bread. Van Helsing also seals the castle doors with sacrificial bread, making it impossible for Dracula to enter. Coming out of the castle, Helsing takes Mina and continues the journey in search of the other friends. In the evening, they saw some nomads coming along the road at the foot of the hill where they were traveling with a large cart. There is a box filled with soil inside the cart. From atop the hill, Helsing and Meena can see Seward, Morris, Homewood, and Harker approaching the wagon from various directions. Although the gypsies try to stop them, Harker and Morris muster all their strength to disperse the nomads and drag the box from the cart to the ground. The sun is setting fast on the horizon. By the time Harker and Morris open the box, the sun had completely set. As night falls, Mina sees a triumphant grin flash across Dracula's face as he regains his powers. But in the next moment, Dracula's throat is cut by Harker's slash. The next moment, Morris's knife slices through Dracula's heart. Dying, Dracula's body crumbles into grains of sand and dust. Morris dies of mortal wounds. However, as if it was Dracula's mark, the scar on Mina's forehead disappeared. Quincy Morris dies, sharing the joy of the success of their efforts. 7 years have passed since all these events. Mina and Jonathan Harker have a baby boy. They call him Quincy in memory of Morris.